Okay, we can go ahead and get this session started. People will filter in as they normally do, but we're gonna get going. Thank you all for joining tonight. I appreciate you all taking the time out of your week to be a part of this session. If this is the first time that you've been in a SHLA session, my name is Annalise. I run this program. You've been getting emails. They've been from me. If you ever have any questions about anything, you can email me at outreach@swe.org. I'll put that email in the chat in a second. Um, Basically, how these sessions work is we're going to have our speaker, Tara, give us her presentation, and there will be a Q&A at the end. So I always recommend if you have a question pop up during the session, I recommend writing it down if you have a piece of paper next to you or something, just because if you automatically put it in the chat, it's easy for it to get buried. So that's just my recommendation, but there will be time to have your questions answered. And I'll quickly give a shout out to our sponsors. We have ExxonMobil, Honeywell, and General Motors. There you can see their lovely logos. Um, and I think that's pretty much it for all of our opening things. So if anyone has any questions, like I said, I'll drop that contact email in the chat. But also if something comes up in the session, you can message me in the chat. But we're going to go ahead and move along. I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight. We are joined by Tara Mohr. Tara is an expert on women's leadership and well-being. She is the author of Playing Big, Practical Wisdom for Women Who Want to Speak Up, Create, and Lead, which was named a Best Book of the Year by Apple's iBooks. Tara is the creator and teacher of the Global Playing Big Leadership Program for Women and of the Playing Big Facilitators Training for coaches, therapists, managers, and mentors. She is a co-active Training Institute certified coach with an MBA from Stanford University and an undergraduate degree in English literature from Yale. And her work has been featured on national media from the New York Times to Today Show to Harvard Business Review. So very exciting to have Tara joining us tonight. I'm very excited for what she has to share with us. Um, and I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to her.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I am really excited to spend this time with you. We are talking today about, I'm going to go back to this while we get settled in here. We're going to be talking about navigating feedback and working with not just what seems like it would be the obvious, more difficult part of that, which is criticism, but actually also some of the ways that praise can get really tricky or even be problematic, especially research has found for high achieving girls and women. So we will get into all of that in a few minutes. But first, I want to pull the camera back a little bit and talk about this idea of playing big and how our relationship to feedback fits into that. So, when I was in my 20s, so not too far ahead of where all of you are now, I was entering the work world. I was working inside organizations for the first time, as were many of my friends. And I started to notice some patterns that really surprised me. And maybe I was a little naive in what I was expecting, but I was surprised to see how many of the organizations we were working in still had leadership with very, very few women. And I also started to feel like I was just surrounded by brilliant, capable women in my workplace, which was at the time in a philanthropic foundation. My friends were brilliant. They were also surrounded by brilliant women colleagues. Yet a lot of us were really struggling with confidence. We were stuck in self doubt. We were feeling tentative about sharing our voices. We were really worried about the smarter or more bold we are, the less likable we're going to be perceived. We were grappling with all of that. And fast forward a few years later, I had followed my interest into coaching work because I really wanted to work with people on how do our inner lives end up shaping our outer lives. And if we could let go of some of that self-doubt and criticism, what kind of better world could we all create through our contributions? So with that interest, I had pursued coaching and gotten trained as a coach and was just starting to coach some clients on the side of my full-time job. And again, with my clients, I was really seeing that pattern of what I would call brilliant women playing small. And that really pained me because I could see how capable my clients were, but they often didn't see that in themselves. And I started to get really interested in how do we unlearn what we need to unlearn and learn what we need to learn to play bigger. And my definition of playing bigger is not a bigger title in your job, it's not a bigger social media following, it's not a bigger paycheck. It's it's just simply that you are being more loyal to your dreams than you're being to your fears. So everyone on this call, every single one of you, your playing big will look really different. Madison's playing big, Marley's playing big, Ahana's playing big. And when I work with people in my courses, sometimes playing big means going for the really prestigious, challenging job. Sometimes it means reclaiming an activity that they love doing but have felt too embarrassed to do. Sometimes it means speaking up more in their everyday life. It has to do with really noticing where you're holding back and noticing what your real dreams are for your life and getting your own loyalty to yourself back on the side of those. Okay, so that's playing big. And I've been really grateful that over the past 15 years, coaching women around playing big and with the Playing Big book, I've been able to help women all around the world with that. And the book has reached hundreds of thousands of people. And part of that playing big work turned out to be that we all need to get better at navigating and dealing with feedback. So when I was coaching women figuring out what do we really need to go for our dreams, I started to see that a lot of us got stuck around issues having to do with the feedback from the world and how we interpret it and how we take it personally or go on an emotional roller coaster with it. And so that's where our focus is going to be today, is on that one aspect of changing our relationship to feedback to support that playing big in our lives, to support that more fulfilling, authentic life. So if you have any immediate questions or reactions to all that, I'm very curious. Please share in the chat. I want today to be very chatty and interactive. If that definition of playing big resonates with you or feels confusing, I'd love to hear. If you already feel like you know how you're struggling with feedback, you can tell me about that. Anything you want to share in the chat in that way is great. And we'll use that throughout our session. So, okay, so we're going to talk about today how being attached to praise or avoidant of criticism might be showing up in your life right now. Some of the research about why this issue can be so big for girls and women in particular. And most important, I like to always be really practical. What are the tools you can use day to day so that essentially you can get the best out of feedback, but not get what I call getting hooked by it? And we'll talk about a framework for that. So I also like to think of this as unhooking from praise and criticism. Unhooking from praise and criticism. Because if you think of that sense of getting hooked by something, it's like you get stuck. It gets its clutches in you. Maybe you were feeling free and powerful before, but now you're hooked. And that's what happens to a lot of us with feedback. So, we're talking about feedback really broadly today. I would say all of these things are examples actually of feedback situations. So, it's not just the obvious time when someone says, "Hey, Annalise, I want to give you some feedback on something that happened today." But we could consider all of these actually feedback situations. So, if you get a great grade on an assignment, right, you've gotten some feedback from the teacher. If you get what would be considered maybe a poor grade on an assignment, you've gotten some feedback. If you get asked to have a leadership position or a special role, that's a kind of feedback actually about maybe how that organization or how those people are seeing you. If you audition for something and you don't get in or never hear back, that's a kind of implied feedback, right? Or if you invite people to something and everyone shows up or nobody shows up, those are, in a way, kinds of feedback. We might not know how to interpret them, but they're types of feedback. So we can really think broadly. Everything we're going to talk about today applies to the kinds of obvious and non-obvious feedback situations that we run into every single day. So, what do I mean by the idea that we get hooked? Well, when we get stuck because of fear of possible criticism that might come, like, I don't want to say that because people might laugh at me. I don't want to give my teacher that idea because I don't think they'll approve. Fears of possible criticism can be one way we get hooked. Some of us actually avoid the things that would bring praise for us. And this can especially happen when we are teens, because I don't know how it is for all of you. When I was in that phase of education, anything that, put you in the spotlight, even in a positive way, was like, could be a little bit risky socially sometimes. But also in our adult lives, we can end up doing things like, I don't want to get too much praise. I don't want people to think I'm arrogant. So I end up avoiding the things that would bring praise. That's another way of being hooked. Sometimes we have old wounds from old forms of criticism. So you can think back, like, did a teacher ever say or make you feel like you couldn't really draw, or like you weren't good at math, or like you weren't a good public speaker, where that kind of stayed with you as a wound and never really got healed, where now you have a critical belief about yourself in that thing, or you're avoiding doing that thing. So that's another way we can get hooked. And then this is kind of the sneaky one. Sometimes we get hooked actually because we become really dependent on or addicted to praise. We want to always be getting the gold star, and we have no idea what to do with ourselves if we're not. And in fact, that's another way that we can get hooked. It doesn't always become problematic in school, but later in our careers, when we need to sometimes make controversial decisions because they're controversial and there are decisions to make if we're in a leadership role or we're in a company that's in a tough situation, or we need to be really innovative and that's going to involve some failure along the way. If we're really dependent on always getting praise for what we do, we can't do those important kinds of work. So you might recognize that being hooked if you're hearing thoughts like these in your head. People won't like what I have to say. My family's going to disapprove, right? And when we're getting criticism or we're fearing it, our inner critic can really pop up as an echo. Oh, I knew I wasn't competent at that. Oh, I'm so ridiculous. Oh, I don't know what I'm talking about. And this is another big part of my work, and another big part of that playing big journey is starting to notice your inner critic. And noticing your inner critic and thinking of it as a voice in your head, one voice, is often a really helpful way to get some distance on it. Like, oh, I have an inner critic. Sometimes it speaks up. That's really different than just saying, oh, I'm not a confident person, or, oh, I really did make a fool of myself. But starting to notice, oh, that's my inner critic talking. And if you're hearing thoughts that are harsh and that you wouldn't say to someone you love, but that's how you're talking to yourself, and you're judgmental or perfectionistic, or maybe even kind of abusive to yourself, that is your inner critic. And it's not the voice of truth. And of course, criticism can really activate it. Okay. Um, this is there's a lot in here about why women and girls in particular can have a different kind of relationship to feedback than our male counterparts do. And I'll just touch on these really briefly, but if you're interested in more about them, there's a lot more in the Playing Big book. But certainly a lot of us, right, we're socialized to be good girls, always get those gold stars, always fit in and behave. So if we do something that brings criticism, maybe we shared a bold idea or we spoke up about something or we kind of rocked the boat, that's very scary for us if our whole life we've been trained to be good girls and told that kind of our lovability was connected to being a good girl. We see a lot of examples in the media that how we're perceived as women and girls is really important. It's even more important than our own internal experience. And so that can make it more scary when we feel like we aren't being perceived well. A lot of times, also, we operate in what I call the noisy room. And what I mean by the noisy room is that a lot of us are, whether you think it's through nature or nurture, we might be especially sensitive to what other people in a room are thinking and feeling. We're reading their cues. That's our high EQ that a lot of times girls are encouraged and socialized to have. And if you're picking up on what everyone's thinking and feeling, you're often kind of getting a lot more subtle feedback about how people are reacting to you than if you were oblivious to all those cues. So the room, whether it's your family's kitchen table or your classroom or uh, a committee that's interviewing you for a job, the room can be really noisy for us, actually, if our emotional intelligence is high, where we're getting a lot of feedback about ourselves that can be distracting or get in our way. And then, of course, there's some really unfair gender things. There's a lot of research that shows the feedback that women get, the negative feedback, it's more personal. It has more to do with personality. It can often get in, especially online, turn into violent terminology or kind of sexualized language. And even just in a more subtle way, research has found that when women get workplace performance reviews, not only do they get more negative feedback than men, but often that feedback includes like a criticism of their personality, not their job performance, but you're too abrasive, you're too aggressive, you're too direct, you're too quiet. Some of you may have gotten feedback like that even already. That's a gender bias thing. That is the kind of feedback that women get uniquely. So, of course, if the feedback's going to be more personal, we're probably going to be more scared of it because it's going to be more wounding and upsetting. And then this last point here, our survival, what I mean by that is simply that for a lot of our history, if you think about women's lives over the past few thousand years, a lot of our survival depended not on our physical might, not on our financial or political power, because we really didn't have that, but we survived by fitting in with the group, being likable and acceptable to the group. We survived through social and communal bonds. And so often, just feeling unliked or feeling like we're receiving criticism can feel really, really scary. And yet sometimes it's really necessary for our playing big. Okay, so let's get into the practical tools and the framework for today. So what may at first sound like a crazy idea that I want to invite you to try on today is this. Feedback gives me information about the person giving the feedback. Feedback gives me information about the person giving the feedback. And we could even go so far as to say feedback doesn't give me information about me, it gives me information about the person or people giving the feedback. So if your history teacher says this paper is poorly organized and sloppily written, what we're learning in that moment is something about what that history teacher feels makes for good or poor writing. And you might get different feedback from a different history teacher. Or you might even know, gosh, if my English teacher read that paper, they would react a little differently, right? And if a boss says to you in a summer internship, your people skills were great, but it seems like your time management wasn't great, we're learning about what they saw and didn't see of your work. We're learning what they see as people skills and what they see as time management. But we're really not learning any facts about you. And that's a pretty radical departure from what we normally think, right? We normally think this feedback is trying to tell me a truth about me. And I might agree with the truth or I might disagree with the truth and think the person's wrong, but I'm not really getting it's not that it's right or wrong. It is a clear reflection of their perspective. So then what do we do? Do we throw all feedback out the window because of that? No. What we do is we get to interpret the feedback as information about the person giving it and then say, oh, what information does this give me about them? What am I learning right now about this person whose perspective is probably relevant to me, right? I probably want to know what my history teacher values and doesn't value in a paper if I want to do well in this class. But it's a big difference if I can remember what I'm learning about right now is what this teacher values or what I'm learning about. You could even stretch it a little further and say, I'm learning about what's expected in a high school student's history paper at my school. But what I'm not learning about through that feedback is, do I measure up? Am I smart? Am I okay? Did I fail? Did I succeed? Am I a talented person? I'm not learning those things. I'm learning something about the people giving the feedback and the world that they're in, whether that's an industry or an academic department or a company. And so then I can ask, what does it tell me about them? And I could learn some strategically useful information. And then I have to decide, is this feedback even relevant to me? And it took me a long time before I knew I had permission to decide that anybody's feedback actually wasn't relevant. I thought being a nice person meant I had to take every human on the planet's feedback seriously and spend time thinking about it and even incorporating it. But none of us actually have time for that. So we have to ask, is this person or are these people part of an audience that I want to reach or influence or that I need to be successful with? Is it a teacher in a class I want to succeed in? Is it a manager in an internship that I want to do well at? Is it a family member that I want to really preserve a relationship with? So is this feedback relevant to my priorities and goals? And if yes, then I want to think about, what is it telling me about that other person? And how do I want to adapt accordingly? And if not, if my answer in step 2 is no, then I'm kind of done with that feedback. So then our third step, right, is okay, if I'm interpreting it as about this person, what am I learning about how to revise my approach to be more effective with them? And effective is such a big word. That's all feedback is about. How do I be effective on this team? How do I be effective with this teacher? How do I be effective in this partner for my project that I'm working on? Again, staying away from all of those personalizing interpretations. Oh, this feedback's telling me how good I am. Do I measure up? Am I okay? Did I mess it up? Not about that. It's telling me about how to be effective with them. So I might have learned, oh, for this history teacher, to be effective writing papers for them, it kind of needs to sound like this and look like this. Okay. So I can stay at the level of kind of what's strategic and not go on such an emotional roller coaster with it. And then in the last step, sometimes this is kind of an optional step. Sometimes there's also a follow-up piece about the relationship at hand. So this might be a situation where, let's say maybe a mentor of yours gave some feedback that you just felt like, maybe you showed them a college essay and they gave some feedback that you felt like, ugh, it was hurtful and it was too harsh and you felt like they really didn't honor your request to just see the essay as a draft. And maybe you went through that step 1 through 3. What does this tell me about them? Oh, I'm learning what they want to see in a college essay. I'm learning what they think is a helpful way to give feedback. Okay, I get that. I've reframed it, but there's this relational piece of like, I'm still feeling a little hurt by them. Maybe I want to make a request and say, hey, next time, could you just word the feedback more gently? Or next time, could we talk about it in person? Because email, it's hard to feel the warmth of the tone or whatever your request would be. Or maybe you want to set a boundary like, oh, I don't think I'm going to ask for them for feedback anymore. That really didn't feel good. So that's this kind of relational piece that sometimes needs some attention after we've reframed the feedback. Okay, So we're gonna try this. Let's just do a quick little 5-minute journaling and then we will move into some questions so that you can get a little experience of this for yourself. So there is a worksheet you can use if you want, but I will also read you through the questions. And if you have something to write with, pen and paper, that is perfect. I would really encourage everyone to just write because different insights will come out than if you just think about it, even though we think I could just think about it, but really it's very helpful to write. So think about a situation that where you got some feedback that felt tough or painful to receive. Could have been a negative comment from a teacher or from a coach, and just write down in a phrase. You don't have to tell the whole story. You remember what it is, just write down in a phrase what that was.
Just so everyone knows, the worksheet has been shared in the chat if you'd like to use that whenever that comes up.
Thank you. Yes, you see it. Yeah. Yeah. We're just going through the worksheet right now. And then you're going to do number 1 here and reframe the feedback and look at it in that new way. What did the feedback tell you about the perspective or the priorities or maybe even the preferences of the person who gave the feedback? What did it tell you about their view and their lens on things? And if anyone wants to write a phrase on that in the chat, I would love to see how this is tracking for you. You can just share what do you think it told you about them? And then checking number 2, is this feedback relevant to your goals? Is it actually relevant to your goals? Yes or no? Or could be not sure. And if it is relevant, then how would you want to revise your approach in the future to be more effective with this person? What is the feedback telling you about that? And then lastly, are there any of those relational pieces left over? Anything you want to process with them, or requests you have, or boundaries you might want to set? Okay. And if you want to share in the chat, did that shift how you experience this feedback? Do you feel anything different emotionally about it? Do you see it in a new way? Feel free to share. And before we go to the Q&A, just a reminder, this is another principle we can keep in mind here, that all substantive work we do will bring criticism at some points along the way. And that's especially true for women and if we are part of other marginalized groups as well. So we want to learn how to expect that, unhook from it, reframe it, so that it doesn't stand in the way of our playing big and our fulfillment. And with that, I cannot wait to hear your questions and thoughts, which really can range anything you want to talk about around your playing big, which can mean your career goals, your challenges, ways you feel you're playing small, your inner critic. We're happy to talk about it all.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tara. That was such a great exercise, and also just it's great to reframe how people receive feedback. I think is just so helpful and also like makes the process of getting feedback more productive in a lot of ways too. So yeah, everybody, if you want to put any questions that you have in the chat, there was one response to when we were going over the worksheet and any thoughts, like if it had made anybody think differently. Luciana had said that it makes her think more objectively about things, which I think is great.
Yeah.
And there was one comment that Samantha had made at the top of the session, which I think it was when you were pointing out maybe if the students had any like traits that they could see maybe as an area for improvement or where they like tended to be, uh,
Mm,
I can't think of the right phrasing.
playing small, as we were talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Samantha had said chronic people pleasing. I didn't know if you had any um, like any advice on maybe how to tackle that because I know people pleasing it can be really hard, especially with like when you feel that way, like how to set boundaries with things like
Yeah.
that. So if you have any feedbacks or suggestions on anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Well, for the person who shared that, and I know we have a couple of Samanthas, I'm curious if you want to share any more about like how does that show up for you? Here she says, it's funny, I'm actually giving a speech tomorrow in my class at school about me trying to teach myself to stop people pleasing and remind myself I don't have to do things to make people like me. So this is actually perfect. Yeah, that's great. Um, yeah, because people pleasing it can be kind of an umbrella term that can be a lot of different things. Like for some people, that's about, yeah, I'm only okay and I'm only likable if I'm pleasing others. Or sometimes just can feel like I don't know how to have difficult conversations. I don't know how to have negotiation conversations. I don't know how to make requests. And one thing I would say about that is um, if you have an opportunity to do any of that kind of training, and I don't know if any happens through SWE, but taking a training in negotiation, especially if it's geared for women, or taking a training in difficult conversations, or in even like the whole body of work called nonviolent communication, which has a lot of kind of skills for how do you make requests. And I share all that because yeah, we could have a deeper fear in this and that, but sometimes we just haven't had the skills to know like if I don't want to do what you want me to do, or if I need to kind of speak up, like I haven't practiced that. How do I even do that? And the reason I mention negotiation, if people are going, well, why are you talking about negotiation? I'm not talking about salary. Negotiation is any conversation where there's two or more parties who have different opinions or interests, and we're trying to come to a mutual solution. That's a negotiation. So all of us are actually in negotiation situations every day. And just getting some basic skills for that can be really helpful. And then, of course, the other thing is any work you do on your inner critic, because sometimes what makes us people please is also there's that inner critic voice saying, well, what you want to do probably doesn't make sense anyway, or they're not going to like you. All those kind of often irrational, but feel really compelling thoughts that keep us from speaking up.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point that like you can't like expect yourself to know what to do if you've literally never done it before. Like it's not something that is inherent. Like it does take practice and experience. So
Yeah.
that's a really great point. We have a question from Nina. She said, "What if you think you're, oh my gosh, what if you think you're doing, what is this? Okay,
Yeah.
doing well. It kept blocking out a word for me. What if you think you're doing well in school slash at a job, and then someone gives you negative feedback that is the opposite from what you thought you were doing? How do you make sure that feedback doesn't damage your motivation?"
Yeah. Um, Well, even this, I would say let's reframe the idea of doing well in school or at a job to just, you thought you were you thought you were working in a way that was aligned with what the other people were expecting. Just it's a subtle difference, but actually makes a big difference, right? Because to say there's these two binaries, I could be doing well or not doing well, that kind of makes it again about how am I measuring up. But what we really mean by doing well is I was doing the thing that was aligned with what people wanted or expected of me. And if I remember that's what it really is, it just is a lot less loaded and charged for us. So I thought I was doing what was expected and aligned with what they wanted. And then I got feedback. And then maybe even again, reframe. It's not that it's negative feedback, it's that I got feedback that it wasn't actually aligned with what people were wanting or expecting. And now I can get really curious about the other person. What were they expecting? What were they wanting? Where did we miss some signals about that? What exactly are they looking for? Where are the gaps? So this is a beautiful part too of this way of reframing is that it can really spark our curiosity about the person across from us, the other person, which when we're taking feedback personally, the last thing we do is get curious about their perspective, right? We kind of run away after the first word often. We don't really even get to understand. So I think the kind of reframing we're talking about today really does change what might otherwise get in the way of our motivation and just make it like, oh, I learned something really interesting about what they were looking for. I can inquire about that. I can see if I want to adjust to be more in alignment with that or if that's not a fit for me, if I have that option. Yeah.
I think that's a really honestly freeing way to view feedback too, as like more like looking for ways to be in alignment. I feel like it's just a lot less black and white, I guess, with that. And that I just feel like would take a lot of the pressure off of things, make you feel more
Exactly.
flexible.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have a question from Luciana. She said, "Do you reflect on positive feedback or only really on negative feedback?"
Great question. I'm so glad you asked this. So, one thing we can do, and I don't know if we will have time, but I would say the same questions we just did, we might get to it today, or if not, you could try it on your own. That same 4 R's reframing exercise, you can do that with positive feedback, and you should do it with positive feedback because what generally happens is, let's say, I'm doing an internship and it's a 6 week internship and 2 weeks in, I have a little check-in meeting with my manager. And they say, we're so glad you're here. You're doing great. And then what we do if we're taking it personally, we kind of go, okay, this is going well. I passed the test. Okay. And we kind of zone out on the specifics of what this person's saying because we're just like, phew, I got through that one. I passed the test. But then we don't learn what am I doing that is desired or appreciated here. And if I could listen to it, I can do more of that. I can lean into that more. I can use that to understand something about the workplace that I'm in. So we do want to go, what is this feedback telling me about the person giving it? How do I want to use that to be even more effective here? That's really important, but it's also important because um, if I remember that positive feedback is telling me about others too, it's not really telling me about me. It's not telling me, phew, I'm a good person, phew, I'm lovable. It's telling me this boss likes that. Or for me, when I write something, okay, these readers online, they responded to that piece. Why is that important? Well, if I write a blog post, let's say, and it gets lots of comments and shares and good reviews, and I kind of take that personally, meaning I go, phew, I that was a good post. Okay, I'm feeling like a capable writer today. um, then what happens when the next post doesn't get that same level of feedback? The only logical corollary, right, is, well, I'm not a capable writer today. But if I took that positive feedback from the first post and I said, this is telling me something about what resonates with my readers. Is it this topic? Is it this length? Is it this was mostly a story? What was it? Let me learn something about them. And then I'm using the feedback, and it's also a lot less of a big deal if I don't get the same feedback the next time.
That's really good advice. I feel like that also, once again, just like helps take pressure off because I do think it's really easy to kind of put yourself on like a roller coaster with feedback, especially like I think about students like even like grades they're getting like the same thing could be said for like writing papers or like I don't know, certain activities or things that they're doing in school and it's like one day it's like really good and then the next day it's not. Like you can think about like what got you there and what led to that, more positive feedback.
Exactly. Exactly. So if you audition for the play and you get the lead, it's not, oh, good, I'm a good actor. It's like, oh, what were they looking for? What was this director looking for in this production? I guess it was aligned with how I showed up. Is there more to learn there? What's interesting about that? That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. If anyone has any other questions, like I said, put them in the chat. Um, Looking at the time we have left too, how do you know like if no one else has any other questions, I don't know if there's time to do the activity with the positive
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah, let's do that. And then I'm wondering too, maybe people can just share in the chat. Would you like to talk a little bit about inner critic? Or I'll give some options. We could talk about inner critic. We could talk more about feedback and some other aspects. Or maybe as another option, we could talk about sort of difficult conversations and negotiation conversations. You tell me in the chat what sounds good to you.
Yeah, that was inner critic.
Inner critic, difficult conversations, or more on feedback.
Okay, we got one difficult conversations. Difficult
Ooh,
conversations. Okay, difficult
okay.
conversations.
Yeah. And for those who replied that, just tell me a little more, like what kinds of conversations are you thinking of, or what would you like to talk about that? I can make some guesses, but I would love to know too.
Yeah, I'm like, because we can talk about, okay,
Yeah, anything from personal, like relationships and boundaries, setting boundaries, to professional, like confronting an unfair superior. Yeah, the idea of confronting other
yeah,
people or giving feedback to others. Yeah, yeah. So kind of I'm guessing this has a lot to do with when our like pressures to be nice and worries about what other people will think of us sort of clash with the things we need to say and sort of get done in our lives.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll do a quick, we'll go to the praise, do the reframing on praise, because that can be really interesting to see. And then we'll go back over to this topic. Okay. So we're gonna go back to these 4 R's and let's try a time when you got some wonderful praise or some praise for something you did or accomplished, where you got positive feedback. And just think of what that situation was, and you can jot it down in a phrase. And then we're going to reframe that. So, the praise that you got, what does that tell you about the perspective or preferences of the people who gave the feedback or the person who gave the feedback? What was it telling you about maybe what they valued or appreciated? And then is this feedback relevant to you? Is it give you some insights or information for a goal that's important to you? And if it's not relevant to a goal that's important to you, you can just kind of stop your process there. If it is relevant and gives you some insight about an audience or a person you want to work with well or reach in some way, then let's consider that next question. How might you want to revise your approach to be even more in line with this feedback? So, how can you lean more into what people want or are supportive of that this praise illuminated for you? How does it lead you to shifting your approach, if at all? And then this is less often needed with praise, but is there any kind of relationship piece that you want to attend to around this interaction? Maybe you want to go back and get more clarification because you actually don't realize what was important to this other stakeholder. Maybe there's a further conversation you want to have. Okay, great. So let me know if that sparked any insights for you that you want to share in the chat. I see Ahana's comment and Samantha's echoing it that sometimes she says, I have a hard time deciphering how to receive praise humbly. It makes me feel awkward and I can't really process it the right way. So I have kind of two tracks here that I want to speak to. So one is um, often when people are praising us, they're also making a bid for connection with us. And so if we just deflect the criticism, if they're saying that speech was so meaningful to me, and you're saying, oh, well, I just did it off the cuff and I don't think it went well, you're actually not showing up for that bid for connection. It's like, no, they just said your speech was meaningful to them. They're telling you something about you, or they're telling you, maybe they're telling you they're proud of you. So sometimes if it feels like just standing in that praise and saying thank you would be selfish, you can think about it in that relational way. Like, how do I meet them in the bid for connection? It's a term from psychologist John Gottman. How do I meet them in that bid for connection that they're making? And then also, I like to remember like everybody has gifts. So you get to have gifts, and there's nothing haughty or arrogant about owning and appreciating your gifts, as long as we're all remembering that every single person on the planet has unique gifts. So that's one track. But track two is hopefully what we just talked about today is helping you see that differently. Because if you remember that the praise is telling you about the other person, it's not telling you about you. They're telling you what made them proud, what touched them, what they thought was awesome. So, in that way, there's like nothing really to negotiate about humbleness. You're just like, let me learn more about what their experience was. That's interesting. And so, in that sense, it's really not about us anyway, and certainly that's how I try and think of it. If someone says, Tara, your book changed my life, I'm like, tell me about your life, because it just means it spoke to something in them. And so we can turn our attention there. Okay. Um, so then let's talk about difficult conversations. Um, and this idea, I'm just looking, confronting people, giving feedback to others. Um, yeah, setting boundaries. Um, okay, so there's, this it's such a big topic, but we'll talk about a few things. Um, so when it comes to giving feedback to others, um, you can use everything that we talked about today, but kind of flip how we're seeing it. Right? So just as we said, wow, if someone's giving us feedback that tells us about them, if you have feedback for someone, you're actually sharing something about you, right? And you can phrase your feedback that way so that it's a lot less likely to be taken as a personal criticism and a lot less likely to make you feel icky. In other words, it's really different if I say to someone, you are you're just a jealous person. If I say that to a friend that I feel has been jealous of me, if I say you're a jealous person, I'm kind of trying to declare something about her, and that's not going to feel very good. But if I say I feel like there's sometimes a competitive energy and it just doesn't feel good to me, like, can we talk about it? That's what we would call, like, it's more like I'm staying on my side of the net because I'm just speaking about my own experience. So that's one principle we can always go to. And even if it's something like on a team or a shared project, it's not you're slacking. It's I really need more support around this part that I'm doing. Would you be willing to XYZ? So kind of getting used to that. I'm making an I statement about what my experience is, and then I'm making a clear request. And I will say, if there's one one little like form of communication I wish I had been taught about in my life about 20 or 30, 20 years earlier would have been good, it would be making clear requests. I feel like women and girls, especially, we just don't get taught that sentence structure. So we're always trying to sneak our needs in there or our preferences in there. And a request is usually it starts with, would you be willing to? And it can be to your sibling. Would you be willing to actually get to school 15 minutes earlier so we're not late for classes anymore? Or teammate, would you be willing to um, pick up the work on Thursday because I've got to stay late at my job? So really learning to say, would you be willing to? And then wait. You don't have to fill the silence. Just wait. That now it's that person's turn. They get to consider their answer. Um, And then when it comes to something like setting boundaries, I think there's a lot, and there's especially a lot on social media right now that's just, I don't know if it feels like it's in your world, but um, of sort of set boundaries, protect your peace, cut off contact with anyone that um, is feeling troubling to you. And I find that for a lot of us, that just ends up making us feel kind of more walled up. Like there's a time for that, but a lot of the time we're missing out on what actually can help us feel more connected and help us navigate through relationship challenges. So I like to just ask, okay, if I needed to be loving to all parties in this situation, including myself, simultaneously, what would that look like? And if loving doesn't feel like quite the right word for your situation, if it's, I don't know what, colleagues or something, if I were to be compassionate and calm towards all parties, including myself, and it's critical to include yourself, what would that look like? And being loving doesn't mean you have to stay in a relationship that doesn't feel good. It just means you're checking in to see, like, what would that energy of love have me do? Because even if you need to say bye or I'm done, it will have you say those things differently. And when we come back to that place in ourselves, we just tend to end up with solutions that are much more creative and much more satisfying. Ultimately, they feel good. to us and often align with how we want to show up in the world. Okay, boundaries. I think we got to, I'm looking at the other comments. And I'm guessing it's probably time to turn it over to you. Back over to you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for like going over that exercise from like the positive perspective and then also this extra time to talk about these hard conversations, how to approach them. Because I think that's just such, it's really great skills to have. And I feel like that's something that what you'll be dealing with that your whole life, like having to have hard conversations. And I think you just offered some really phenomenal perspective on how to approach those, and I think that's huge. Really, like I feel like some of these things are some of these skills are ones that people don't always learn until I want to say college for some reason. Like you're just dealing with
Yeah.
more interpersonal stuff. You're on your own. You don't have as many adults there supervising you. But I feel like to be able to have these skills starting to grow, like when you're in high school, I feel like that's putting you just at a huge advantage for your own path in life and the relationships that you have. So I really, really appreciate you coming and speaking with our students today. And I also thank you to all the students that joined us tonight. You all asked really wonderful questions and were very great at participating. And I thought this was a wonderful session. So thank you everybody for joining. Um, this session it is actively being recorded and it's going to be up on our YouTube channel for you to view if you want to watch this back again as a reference point for anything, or if you want to watch it again or if anybody's missed it. So that's available. Um, I'll give one other quick shout out to our sponsors. We have ExxonMobil, Honeywell, and General Motors. I think that's it for tonight. I didn't put this in here earlier, so here's the outreach email if you need to contact me. But I think that's everything for tonight. Thank you so much, Tara, and thank you everybody. Have a great rest of your
Thank
night.
you. Stay in touch.
Yes, absolutely.